in our rural communities, they have not proven to be the bang for the buck that independent family farmers have in terms of job creation that are good paying and fair jobs in our communities. So thank you for all you're doing on competition and on local food. And we just want to remember that we are a job creator out here. So thank you.
Robert, you had your hand up. Go ahead. Wait for the mic so everybody can hear you.
You know, most of the things that have been proposed today cost money. And there is this concern about the federal deficit. I hope that your administration will recognize, as I know you will, that it's possible, first of all, to reduce the deficit over time and sometimes in the short run realize that you need to increase the deficit. And I hope the concern about the deficit in the long run doesn't crowd out the need for additional spending in the short run. And I also think that some of these programs that increase jobs and increase GDP are probably the fastest way to get the economy back on a track that will reduce the deficit over time. It's certainly a better way to reduce the deficit than putting ourselves into a debtor's prison and assume we can deflate our way to recovery.
Well, I think this is an important point. You know, we've been talking a lot about specific initiatives. There is a macroeconomic element to this whole thing, and so let me just amplify what was just said. We have a structural deficit that is real and growing apart from the financial crisis. We inherited it. You know, we're spending about 23% of GDP, and we take in 18% of GDP, and that gap is growing because healthcare costs, Medicare and Medicaid in particular, are growing. And we've got to do something about that. You then layer on top of that the huge loss of tax revenue as a consequence of the financial crisis and the greater demands for unemployment insurance and so forth. That's another layer. Probably the smallest layer is actually what we did in terms of the Recovery Act. I mean, I think there's a misperception out there that somehow the Recovery Act caused these deficits. No, I mean we've got a 9-point-something trillion dollar deficit. Maybe $1 trillion of it can be attributed to both the Recovery Act as well as the cleanup work that we had to do in terms of the banks. It turns out actually TARP, as wildly unpopular as it has been much cheaper than any of us anticipated. So that's not what's contributing to the deficit. We've got a long-term structural deficit that is primarily being driven by healthcare costs and our long-term entitlement programs. All right, so that's the baseline. Now, if we can't grow our economy, then it is going to be that much harder for us to reduce the deficit. The single most important thing we could do right now for deficit reduction is to spark strong economic growth, which means that people who've got jobs are paying taxes and businesses that are making profits have taxes, are paying taxes. That's the most important thing we can do. We understand that in this administration. That's not always the dialogue that's going on out there in public, and we're going to have to do a better job of educating the public on that. The last thing we would want to do in the midst of what is a weak recovery is us to essentially take more money out of the system, either by raising taxes or by drastically slashing spending. And frankly, because state and local governments generally don't have the capacity to engage in deficit spending, some of that obligation falls on the federal government. Having said that, what is also true is that unless businesses and global capital markets have some sense that we've got to plan medium and long term to get the deficit down, it's hard for us to be credible, and that also could be counterproductive. So we've got about as difficult a economic play as is possible, which is to press the accelerator in terms of job growth, but then know when to apply the brakes in the out years and do that credibly. We are trying to strike that balance, but we're going to need help from all of you who oftentimes are more credible than politicians in delivering that message because we want to leverage whatever public dollars are spent, and we are under no illusion that somehow the federal government can spend its way out of this recession. But it is absolutely true that any of the ideas that have been mentioned here are still going to require some public dollars, and those are actually good investments to make right now. Okay. How much time do we have? Just want to make sure I'm not in. Huh? We're doing good. Okay, good. We actually have an internet question because we're trying to make sure that this goes out to other locations. What do you got, Megan?
Mr. President, as you know, in addition to all of these people, a lot of people have been watching through the website, all the breakout sessions, which will be available for anyone to watch afterwards for those of you who wanted to check out other ones. But they've also been talking on Facebook, on Twitter about what they're seeing. And we had one question from Don Arrington, who says, "What confuses me is I have an MBA, and that has educated me right out of the market. I thought furthering my education was supposed to help me in a tough job market."
Well, look, first of all, I got a law degree, so it was more expensive, it took longer, and I don't know how much more useful it was. But that email, I think, is indicative of what a lot of people are feeling out there. This is not the normal recession that we've just gone through. This is one that is going deep into the economy. It is not hitting blue-collar workers alone. It is hitting white-collar workers just as hard. If in some cases, when it comes to middle management, it's actually hitting them harder. A lot of people who expected to always be able to find a job are finding the job market really tight. I guess what I'd say is, number one, we know long-term that more education means more opportunity for the individual, greater income for the individual. That is not decreasing, that is actually increasing. The gap between higher education and somebody with a high school education. And in a knowledge-based economy, that's not going away. So as frustrating as it may be for the college grad or the MBA, the fact of the matter is you are still going to be much better off than if you didn't have that education, short-term as well as long-term.